I would almost describe it at that time as like whispers of the Holy Spirit. I had a very, very powerful experience of God's love. I'd spent all my life not realising that how much God loved us, how much difference it could make to the world.
So Heather, we're here in London, but where did you come from to be with us today?
I live in Yorkshire, the great county of Yorkshire in northern England. Yorkshire folk are very proud of where they come from, and as am I.
When you started in journalism, what did you do?
So it was on my student newspaper that I first started to love journalism. I was very lucky after university to pretty much almost get straight onto national newspapers. So you were right in the thick of it. It was a very exciting and interesting job that I just took to like a duck to water. People used to call me a natural hack. Hack is a sort of slang term for journalist, and I loved it. I was very young.
What did you like about it?
I liked I'm quite inquisitive and I like investigating things, and as a journalist you basically get paid to look into things, to ask people difficult questions, to meet lots of interesting people. It was a great job. I loved it.
How would you have described yourself then?
I was a young, very immersed. I didn't realise it at the time, but I was very immersed in a very secular, liberal worldview. I had very secular, liberal morals, and I didn't really know or understand anything other than that. I intended to do good in the world. That's one of the reasons I was interested in journalism. I wanted to right wrongs and investigate corruption. And I saw a lot of the answers to the world's problems as political. And all we needed to do was to get the right caring political people in power, and then so many good things would come from that. So quite naive, in a word. But yeah, I was, like most people in my generation, very much into going out, drinking. That was the main meaning that I got from life was that friendship and drinking with friends and my career.
You've sort of answered this, but let me ask it specifically. What do you reckon doing good looked like?
I thought doing good was I'd absorbed a way of looking at the world that I didn't realise that I'd absorbed. It was completely unconscious. That saw the world in goodies and baddies, but the goodies were the downtrodden, the political, the left wing, and the baddies were the rich, the uncaring, and I very much saw people in those terms. And I didn't have a great deal of insight into myself, how I might be very like some of those people that I demonised and thought were wrong and bad. But very much the answer to the world's problems was purely political. And that I suppose that gave me a sense of hope, that with the right politics, with the right people in power, that good could come from that. That's not really what I think anymore.
In the span between the goodies and the baddies, where did the Christian church sit for you?
My perception of the Christian church, I knew very few Christians as I was growing up. Where I lived in Yorkshire was a particular sort of, it was just very few practicing Christians. Apart from one couple who were an amazing witness to me, and although they didn't talk about Jesus explicitly, they were very kind and loving. So they prayed for me a lot as a child. But other than that, I'd really sort of from somewhere absorbed this belief that the church was old-fashioned, very restrictive, very uncaring or unloving, very bigoted, very old-fashioned and boring, just quite negative in general.
I suppose not a particularly positive view.
No.
You took a break from journalism. Why take the break?
So I'd been on national newspapers for 5 years, which is anyone who's done it will tell you is quite tiring. I think I was a little bit tired, and I was coming to the view at that, or coming to realise that what I was doing was not really helping the world in any way. In fact, it was often quite negative, and probably also getting a little bit bored. I do tend to get bored quite easily. But I got really interested in the concept of psychology or therapy as a way of helping people and helping them to become, to be freed, I guess, from their problems or the things that hold them back. So I actually left journalism initially to train as a clinical psychologist. So I went back to studying psychology, did lots of jobs in mental health, and did eventually get onto a training course, although I left. But I kind of wanted to do something that was much more caring and using that kind of side of myself.
Yeah, and that opened up the opportunity to explore like the spiritual realm and the spiritual side of life. What did that look like for you?
I think in journalism, I was so wrapped up in it. It was so fast-paced. You were either fast-paced in the newsroom or you were drinking in the evening. And it doesn't give you a lot of space and time to think and reflect. And so when I left and I was working on, I went, from the heights, I suppose, of being a journalist on a national newspaper to being a nursing assistant on a mental health ward, where you saw a lot of suffering. And certainly it was in Yorkshire, and the people there don't have any airs and graces. I was brought right back down to earth, which was a very good thing. And I loved the job, I loved the people working on a mental health ward, but there's lots of time and space to think, to reflect. And I felt very strongly that I needed something spiritual in my life. I think it was, looking back, some of it was like unconsciously, there was a sense of wanting to make sense of the suffering that I was seeing. There's a lot of people who were really having difficult lives. But there was, deep inside of me, a real hunger or desire for something else. And I knew it was spiritual. So I went on a bit of a quest. I went to the usual places that people of my generation and my kind of background go to, like Buddhism, paganism I was very interested in at one point. And when we're searching, I guess, was searching and looking for something.
You've already said what your view of the church and the Christian church was. How did that become a possible option for you then in exploring faith and spiritual life?
I think I'd had, as with a lot of people at the time, this is way before Dawkins and the new atheists really got going. I definitely had a sense of, actually, well, yeah, Jesus was a good guy. But, the church has just distorted his teachings for power and all this kind of thing. So I would have been reasonably open to who Jesus was, teachings, had a vague idea of, love your neighbour and that kind of thing. So I think as part of that spiritual quest I was on, I read the Gospels again. I had read them years before. And it was a very powerful sense of, this is true, and what Jesus was teaching was true, and that this could solve the world's problems. This is what I was looking for, this great hope for the world. And I could see that if we made an effort to follow these guidelines that Jesus was giving, which are quite radical when you really take what he says very seriously, what he's suggesting and teaching is very radical. But I wanted it. I was like, yeah, I want to live like this. I want to follow this man. So that started me on the process.
Were you surprised
exploring.
When you read about Jesus and found it attractive and that it might be the answers to what you see in the world? Did that surprise you?
A little bit, but I think because I'd had this sort of because I had this idea that Jesus was fine, but it was the church that was bad. That maybe that sort of, at first it still fitted very much into that. So I would go to churches and argue with people a lot. I really gave some people quite a hard time, bless them. And yeah, if that ever happens to you, I have a lot of time for people like that now who sort of argue with you about Christianity, because I was like that myself. And I think that the teachings, it very, very much chimed with that sort of left-wing liberal outlook that I had, caring for the poor, wanting to be tolerant. So there were certain aspects of Jesus' teachings that really chimed with that. But when I look back on it, I think there was something much deeper and much more profound going on, but I didn't perhaps completely see that at the time.
So you're reading the Gospels and you're attracted to the person of Jesus and his values. What do you then do? Do you start turning up to church?
Yeah, I went to all sorts of different churches, searching for a church that I would feel, in my eyes, was genuinely, following Jesus. And some, I would say, in the way I looked at things at the time were. I was more open-minded to the whole idea of Jesus as God, or worshipping God, prayer and worship. And I actually think as I started to do that and practice it, because obviously Jesus teaches about prayer, he teaches about who he is. So because I was open to Jesus and his teachings, I think that led me to be more open to the more religious or doctrinal side of things.
What step did you take as well as going to church?
So I was doing a lot of private Bible reading. I started to read Christian books, mostly from a very liberal perspective. And some of the stories in those books really shook me, I think, because I'd not really encountered Christians or anyone who could tell of the difference that Jesus had made to them. So some of those stories really affected me. And so I was going to church, and I would almost describe it at that time as like whispers of the Holy Spirit in me, of something. I could feel something, and I wasn't sure what it was exactly. And there's certain sermons that maybe stuck out and made me start to think about things a bit deeper. But mostly I would say it was private prayer and Bible study, and really searching and questioning. But I was very much still wrapped up in my liberal, secular way of viewing the world. So I was still interpreting Christianity and Jesus through that lens. And I didn't really, I couldn't see what I couldn't see. I couldn't see that maybe I was quite blinkered or biased in the way that I was approaching things. So yeah, it was a period of probably about 2 years of really wrestling, I think, with the church, especially Christian doctrine and morals that have from throughout history. And I wrestled and I wrestled, and probably I think it was something supernatural that eventually shifted. And I knew I wanted to follow Christ. So for me, being baptised was me saying, I want to follow Christ. Even if I don't necessarily understand or agree with all of these teachings that the church had, or I didn't necessarily agree with the church, I did want to follow Christ. So that's why I got baptised. After
your baptism, what was your experience of God after baptism?
So I would say overall, I moved for one thing, which maybe was part of it, but it was kind of as it was for a few months, but then completely out of the blue and not really expecting anything to happen. I was reading my Bible on my bed one day, and I had a very, very powerful experience of God's love. And it's one of those, I mean, people always say this, but you can't really put it into words. I knew it was God's love for me. And it was a strange sense of, if someone in front of me had a knife and wanted to kill me, that love would have loved them anyway. And I could see, strangely at the same time, that was that's what I'd been doing to God. I'd been kind of holding up a knife, and that God loved me so much anyway. And it was a very, very powerful sense of God's love that I'd kind of read and understood God's love in a sense, but that experience completely blew my mind. And from that point on is when I think what most people would say, I was born again and started bouncing around talking about Jesus and stopped arguing about everything, mostly, like occasional arguments, but stopped fighting with the church, and really felt a deep sense that I wanted other people to know as well, that I hadn't, had spent at that time, I think I was in my late 20s, so I'd spent all my life not realising that God, how much God loved us, how much difference it could make to the world. So I became very passionate about talking about it and talking to people about God after that point.